So let me guess. You came across Trudvang, you fell in love with this gorgeous Paul Bonner artwork, you read through some of the books, and then that's as far as it got. Because this system is a little obtuse. So I'm going to make a few videos explaining how to get through this system and actually run a game and get your friends excited to play it. I've run a few adventures in it, and I love the system. It's really interesting the way it puts a focus on survival and resource management, and it makes you feel like fighting should not be your first option whenever you come across some sort of monster or conflict. That it makes your players think twice before they just roll initiative and want to kill stuff. Because every combat needs to be carefully considered in this game. And that's something that I don't find in a lot of RPGs, and it's not going to be for everybody. But if that sounds fun to you, then this is the right system to play. It's just a little bit hard to get into. So first, in this video, I want to make an overview of just how a normal game day is going to go, a normal session will run, and then I'll make a video on combat in detail, and then I'll make a video on the magic system as well. Each thing has enough moving parts. I don't want to put them all in one video. It'd be too long and it'd be just too much to do it all at once. So what to expect from a normal adventuring day in Trudvang is, well, you're going to go through and make characters. The character creation, I have a previous video on that. You might need to watch that as well. The character creation is pretty complex in the number of points you can use, or the way that points are spent in making a character is pretty complex. And getting the math right, you definitely need to audit those character sheets, make sure it's right. I also made an Excel spreadsheet to do all the math for you. I think it's accurate. If it's not, let me know, but that you'll find in the description down below, a link to that. But you can use that Excel spreadsheet to kind of help make a character. But you'll definitely need to help your players through that. Then after you've made characters, a normal adventuring day or a normal kind of session, what you'd expect is you're going to probably go through more days than you expect in this game. There's a lot of RPGs where you might look back. I don't know if anyone's ever done it or if you've ever done this, but you look back and you think, man, we went from level 1 to level 14 or whatever when this campaign ended, and it took a month. My character went from knowing almost nothing and a goblin being able to kill him to being able to like challenge vampires and all kinds of stuff like that in like a month. It doesn't make sense. So the thing about Trudvang is you're not going to have that feeling because so much of the time in this game is measured in days instead of seconds or minutes. And so there's many systems in the game where everything happens very slowly. So you're going to need to plan your sessions like that, where you're going to have some downtime in between, where what I like to do is make a map and kind of plot out, all right, to get from A to B, it's going to take this many days of walking. And that I can make a whole separate video on how to do mapping, how to make, how to plot out how an adventure is going to go and how much time it's going to take. But you should try to plan for multiple days in this game. One of the stats is that you can, every character can survive in the wild for 10 days plus or minus their psyche modifier. And I will say one of the hard parts about learning and running and teaching this game is that not all the rules are where you'd expect them to be. So the player's handbook says a character can survive in the wild 10 days plus or minus their psyche. It doesn't tell you what happens after that. So do they die? Do they just panic? What goes on? And so in the Game Master Guide is actually where it explains what happens after day 10. And so, which is basically just if you fail a skill roll or a what do they call it? A situation modifier, situation roll. If you fail that, you get a -1 on everything. And then it gets worse if you're not eating. It gets like, it doubles. It's like -2 to everything per day that you're not eating. And then so you want to manage all these things. Like time is a very important aspect of Trudvang. So you want to make sure that your quests and adventures and things are planned like that. You don't want everything to be so close together that everything they can get back to town every night. That's not how you want Trudvang to work. You want it to take several days to get out there, and you want crossing that 10-day milestone to be kind of a big deal in your game. So your first adventure or two, that those should be within a few days of town, to where they may need to do some hunting and gathering, things like that, and get used to those parts of the game, and actually uh, also find use in some of the skills that they've probably spec'd into. So you want to make sure that's a part of your game. Is the travel needs to be an important part, but I wouldn't uh, put too much travel on them at the very beginning. But you can run through, you might run through a week in one session, one night, because you can run through in this game. Uh, a day may only take a few minutes to play through if there's no combat, and so you could even have hunting and stuff like that in those days. Um, so the way I would run it is I'd break my time down into about 2 or 4 hour chunks, then ask what people are doing during that time. And another thing about the game is, because time is such a big factor, you want consequences for things taking too long. And so you want, I like to have a calendar in my game where I know what day things are happening on, and I will set an important event on a certain day on the calendar, and I won't move it. And so if they make it in time, great. If they don't, bad things are going to happen. So I like having a consequence for them taking too long, because that might make them hurry. And the choice to make camp and rest is a big deal in Trudvang, because your default healing in this game is 1 hit point a day. You can up it to, like, based on your skills alone, you make your natural healing up to about, I believe it's 5 hit points per day, and then you can double that with a healing skill if they've been wounded. You can patch them up and apply some kind of ointment, something like. There's a skill that does that, where um, if you succeed on some skill roll, you'll double their natural healing for the day. So you would, best case scenario, get 10 hit points back out of your, like, 30 in a day, but healing is very slow in this game. So making camp is a big deal. It's hard to heal when you're in the wild. Um, so that's one big aspect of the game, is the time. And so you would need to plan your adventures and things accordingly for that. And then kind of the way the session will play out, you'll roll. The way the Game Master's Guide does it is kind of what it tells you to expect. Let's see. I'm so prepared. Here we go. Campaign play. Campaign play opens up with hunting.
Assuming your players are out long enough that they do need to hunt, kind of the way to expect that to work is you will determine any kind of modifiers for their hunting based on the hunting terrain, which, if they're in a forest, which is probably where they're going to be at, and if it's early on, I would probably say it was just favorable. Probably just give them that. So that's a +2 modifier to their skill roll on hunting. And then they decide how long they want to hunt, probably 4 or 6 hours for a regular game. Every extra hour they spend, they get like a +1 modifier. If they're hunting in a group, that modifier goes up faster, so you get like +2 if there's multiple people. It's +2 per hour extra. And then if, uh, let's see, after that, you determine what kind of game they're hunting, whether it's small or standard or big game. And then the rule book basically just says that they make the roll for their hunting. I think the specific specialty is wilderness. No, hunting skill. It's just a hunting skill, I guess. So, I'm gonna double check that. I have the player's handbook right here, so I'll double check. So we've got wilderness, hunting and fishing. Yep, it's a specialty. So you would use your kind of the way the skills will work. I can use this just as an example. The There's a skill called wilderness. So your skill level in that is from 1 to 10. So if your skill level, let's say it's 10, let's say you just maxed it out, it's 10. When you go hunting, your target is 10. And then let's say you've also put levels into the hunting experience discipline. That can be from levels 1 to 5, and each level will give you plus 1 on your skill value that you need. So then you also have the hunting and fishing specialty under that discipline. So you have the skill, you have the discipline, then you have the specialty under that discipline. All three of these contribute to what your skill value is going to be in doing that particular specialty. So when you're hunting, you would add up. Oh, and every level of hunting and fishing gives you plus 2. So you can get a max of 10 out of the hunting skill, or I'm sorry, the wilderness skill, and then up to 5 points out of the hunting experience discipline, and then up to 10 points again out of the hunting and fishing specialty. So in total, that's 25 max that you can get. And the reason why you might want to think about going above 20, even though you're only rolling a 20 sided die, is because based on the terrain, so the type of hunting ground, and uh, what you're hunting, and the higher the difference in your success determines how many rations you get. And so the better your success is, like if I succeed by 6, for example, on small game, that gives me 1d6 plus 2 rations. So not a whole lot. If I succeed by 10, I get 1d10 plus 2. So, and then once you get to once you're succeeding by, in this case, it shows like if you succeed by 20, by over 20, it's like 2d10 plus 4. It gets up to like huge amounts of rations that you're getting from this game. And that's just for small game. If you did big game, I mean, good luck succeeding by 20 on big game, but you would get 8d10, which is a huge amount of rations. So I don't know that you'd be able to carry that much. Um, it's insane, like how many rations you're getting. So for big game, but that's hard to do. So it takes a lot of time. Uh, but the more time you spend is going to give you more and more points to that skill value. That's kind of how you could get those gigantic numbers. Is if you spend a ton of time hunting, then you may be able to take down that moose and get a lot of points for it. What I personally would do if we're hunting is in the game is I would probably do for small game and maybe standard game, just probably depends on how much time we have in that session. I would probably just role play out what happens in the scenario in the hunt. Probably wouldn't go through and actually have them do a combat with the animal, especially since the animals can have really high hit points for like a moose or something like that. And uh, it really, if a moose gets hit by an arrow, it just makes sense for it to run. Like it may attack, but depending on the distance, the moose may just take off. I mean, and it would be a very easy possibility for your player to hit the moose with an arrow and not deal enough damage to kill it. And so then you have to determine what you want to do with that. Do you want them to track it more and spend more time hunting? So it might just be you might do that on kind of a case by case basis. If it's a really difficult place and they got lucky on some rolls and they spent the minimum time hunting, then maybe you saw and they like barely get their like some of these say no catch, where they usually succeed by like 1 or 1 to 4, and there's no catch on big game. In that case, you've got to get a really high success margin to actually take down big game. So that's kind of an interesting way they've done that in the game.
I'm not actually sure that it talks about spoilage much in the game on if your food spoils while you're in the wild. So that might be something that needs to be worked on. I don't remember anything about that. I didn't see anything in my when I was reading through the Game Master Guide tonight. But so you can expect to be tracking food every day, tracking things like ammo, like for their arrows. That tracking arrows is important and stuff like that because you want to give characters that can make these things something to do, and it gives them something to spend their money on. Resources are very tight in this game, so they're going to be wanting to loot stuff as well. So you should be prepared if they do kill some goblins or whatever, then you want it to have things for them to loot to feel like it was worth it. Because spending your hit points on a fight is a big deal. So you want to be able to reward that. Because it is a very stressful game. So, or at least early on, it sure is. Um, then at the end of, so let's say you go through, you're tracking food, you're tracking arrows. Um, I would say, even though you may not want to do that at the very beginning, I would tell you should, because if you don't, you're going to be missing out on a key part of the game. And also track days and make it a long, where it takes 3 or 4 days to get to the site that they're going to. That's what I would recommend on your first kind of adventure. And then at the end of the session, so you're probably going to go through, you'll be tracking all that stuff, and then at the end of the session, if they've completed a quest, you want to reward them with a good amount of adventure points. If they haven't completed it, though, I would recommend always awarding adventure points between every quest. Some people want to do where you can only spend your adventure points in town. I've heard of people doing that, but I don't really care. I just want to. It's fun to level up your character, so that's kind of going to keep them in the game and keep them wanting to come back for it. Is they get a few little points here and there, and then when they complete a quest, they get a big chunk of points. I'd say 5 points. That's kind of what the Game Master Guide recommends. That it feels about right. Is if you're giving out adventure points every session, give like 5 points. That's probably what I would do. 5 points to every player, and then they can spend them how they want. They can save them. They can spend them. Also, when they create a character, they're going to have the minimum is probably 350 points, and don't feel like they need to use every single one. Like if they have some left over, just let them keep them, and then they'll have a little bit. If they have 10 or 15 points left and they just don't know what they want to spend it on, just let them keep it, and then once they've started playing, they'll be like, oh, I should probably have something in that skill so I can actually help when that happens. And so then they'll have something to spend it on after they've been playing for a little bit. And 15 points isn't going to make a big difference at the very beginning. They need to. It'll be nice for them to have that flexibility. That's kind of what to expect from a typical run through. Is tracking food and ammo, and at the end of the day, you give them some XP, some adventure points to spend on their character. Um, they will have combats. The way that I can run through the basics of combat is you'll roll initiative every round. Initiative is based on the armor you're wearing and uh, the item or spell or attack or spell you want to do will determine your initiative as well. Everything will lower you in the initiative order. So um, I would prepare them to let them know you're going to have negative initiative a lot, and shouldn't feel bad about that. That's just the nature of the game. You're gonna roll a d10 for initiative and then subtract stuff, probably a minimum of 5 off of it, like every time. And so, and then if there's any kind of negative modifiers due to fear, things like that, every monster you encounter is going to cause fear. And so that fear is going to come down over time, but it causes negative modifiers on everything that your character does. And so this game really tries to show that these creatures and monsters are not just everyday things for these people. That the first time you see a monster, you definitely need to roll fear for it. If they've if this is the third or fourth time they've fought this monster in the last 2 weeks, then there's a good chance that they're kind of used to it by now. So you don't have to keep rolling fear every time. But when they see a new monster, you need to make them roll fear because that's going to be a big deal. It's going to, for one, give the character, or I'm sorry, give the player an idea of what their character feels. And so a lot of the stuff in this game is going to be brand new to people, and they're not going to have any kind of context for what to expect. So having that fear number of how much fear they got hit with is going to help them understand how big and bad this monster is. Because they're probably not going to know. I don't tell my players much about their stats at all. And so, unless they have some kind of monster knowledge skill, that I would allow them to read some of the monster manual, but that'd be about it. Otherwise, I don't tell them a whole lot. I might have an NPC give them information that may or may not be accurate, but that's about as far as it goes. And so in combat, you're going to spend combat points on your attacks to decide how much effort you're committing in making that attack succeed. And so if you have 20 combat points that you can use for attacks, and your weapon, let's say it can attack twice, that it can probably a single, like a one handed weapon, probably can attack twice. I think most of them can. Then you have the option of spending all 20 points on one attack, and you're probably going to hit. There may be some negative modifiers applied to it, but more than likely you're going to hit. Also, as you take damage, you get into these thresholds of damage where every time you drop to a new threshold, there's like 4 levels. One has no negative modifiers, then it gets worse and worse and worse, and more negative modifiers get applied to everything you do because of how wounded you are. And so the game definitely has like a death spiral built into it, where once you start dying faster, and you start getting worse at combat. A lot of monsters also have a death spiral, so that kind of helps. But some other ones, like I'm pretty sure undead don't have a death spiral at all because they're dead, and so they're not they're not uh, feeling weakened the same way a human or something would as they take more and more damage. So they're undead until they're re-dead. So that's how they work. But as you take damage, you'll go into these thresholds, and that makes it harder and harder. So you may start choosing to do less attacks because that 20 points is now effectively turned into, I spend them all in one attack. I have to roll under a 15 because of all the modifiers. And I'd rather deal with a -5 on one attack than a -5 on 2 attacks at 10, which turn into fives. That would be terrible. But you can split it. So when you're feeling good, you could split your attack into two, and you can make one really likely to succeed, then one that's not as likely, but it'd be nice to get a second hit in. So you might do 15 and 5 with those points, to where I'm pretty sure I'm going to hit that first one, and then it'd be great. If I got the second one, probably not, but it'd be nice. So you could do that. Or if you miss that first one, you may say, I'm going to save those 5 points and so I can parry or something like that. But that's kind of the basics of how combat is going to work. There's a lot of combat options. I'll go into those more in the actual full combat video. But this game does recommend, or they tell you in the rulebook, that you roll initiative every round. So you have everyone roll, do their modifiers for what their action is going to be that round, factor in all those numbers, and then I would say write it down because you're going to be doing it a lot. And what I would probably say is early on, I would personally probably roll initiative once, and then if we came to a really important battle, roll every round. The switching of initiative order becomes a big deal in an important fight. It's not as big of a deal in kind of a lackluster everyday fight, but every fight in this game can be nasty. So even a goblin can get lucky on a shot. So um, it could be worth it to do the initiative every round. It's kind of your personal taste. You might try it, decide you don't like it, being every single round having to re-roll it, and then go to no re-rolling. Just have initiative set at the beginning with what they're probably going to be casting or using most of the time, and just set the initiative value at that. That'd probably be fine. I don't think it would have a major impact on the game, but I would still say to do the every round initiative on kind of set piece battles that are like your boss fights and stuff like that. Um, Kind of an overview of magic. In combat, there's going to be an issue value for every spell, so that'll just determine what your order is going to be. But you want to look at casting time because sometimes it takes multiple turns to cast big, nasty spells. But you got to be really careful with that, as like if you get hit and you can't maintain the spell, it's you just lose it. You just lose the points. You lose the time you spent on it. It's just a waste. So with casting, also the way that Trudvang works is for Vintner, which is they have two types of magic. Basically, you have Vintner Weavers, which they are probably what if you're familiar with like D&D. You probably call them. You probably say they're wizards, kind of the wizard type of caster, where it is learned, and it's uh, drawing on the power of the weave. I think even D&D uses that term, but it, Vintner basically in this game is threads of magical energy that tie everything together. And if you learn to see Vintner, you can learn to manipulate it. And by pulling on those strings of Vintner that connect all of the world together, you can create new things. You can make things interact in ways that they wouldn't normally, and they call that magic or Vintner Weavers. So that's one type of Vintner, or that one type of magic is the Vintner Weavers. The other type is Dimwalkers. Dimwalkers are clerics, basically. They follow a religion, and that religion, by practicing it, gives them certain powers. And in both cases, there can be negative effects by either tugging on the Vintner too much, and Vintner almost has a mind of its own. It almost has a personality where it doesn't want to be abused. And so you shouldn't use Vintner just to light a fire when someone could easily make one on their own. It would just take longer. Doing something for a trivial task, um, something like moving an object across the room because you don't want to get up off the couch, would be like a prime example of when Vintner would kind of whiplash against you and cause some bad effect. And so in the game, they call it negations. So it's really up to the game master to decide what happens with negations. So there is a lot of pressure put on you to come up with something on the spot of what happens. It doesn't have to happen every time. Typically, I say the first spell cast in a place doesn't do anything, but multiple castings of spells. The idea is kind of that these threads of Vintner that are everywhere are starting to get pulled on, and as they keep getting pulled, they start to get tangled and tight. And so whenever you pull on that thread of Vintner, it's going to pull a lot of stuff with it. Almost like if you ever played pick up sticks and you're trying to pick up a stick from the bottom, it's going to pull a lot of stuff with it. Kind of that same idea, um, where it's you just gotta. If you're only tugging at one thing at a time, it's not going to make a big impact. But if you start to pull in a lot of these threads, then there's going to be bigger and bigger effects. And it's kind of like um, the law of thermodynamics, where there's an equal and opposite reaction. It's kind of the idea. So uh, we've had games where people have cast a spell, and typically that spell will, a negation for it will create an opposite effect. So that opposite effect, in one case, someone cast a spell to try to be able to read this language that was on the wall. They couldn't read it. They didn't know the language, so they wanted to cast a spell to learn how to read that language for a moment, and they failed. So, uh, did some random die rolls. There'd been a lot of magic cast in this area already, and she rolled really, really poorly on uh, her rolls of how I think she was like a critical failure or something like that. And so there was a pretty bad effect. So I rolled to determine which character was affected, and one of the characters got hit by this negation, and she was unable to communicate at all for like an hour. And so they're in the middle of a dungeon or a tomb, I think is what it was. But and she can't communicate at all. And she had a lot of fun with it. She actually put headphones on and played music through them. So she literally couldn't hear anyone else at the table and have any clue what was going on. And so she also wouldn't speak to them while like during this time. So that she kept role playing it during that time for an hour. So she had no idea what was going on. So that was a lot of fun. The negations in the game really make the magic system. So if you're gonna use magic, don't make the negations sound too scary. You might use that example of just like it only affected her for like an hour, and it wasn't a big deal. It was just a lot of fun. Um, it wasn't, and it didn't end up being like a big major deal, but it was inconvenient, but it was fun. It made it feel like magic. It didn't feel like just a skill on a hotbar, like so many spells and games are. That they're just like there's no functional difference between this being magic and it being just an ability I get from being this class or whatever. It's not functionally any different. Whereas in Trudvang, magic feels dangerous and it feels like something you're tapping into that you don't have total control over. You're trying to manipulate it and get it to do what you want, but it may not cooperate, and you got to deal with that. So that's a unique part of Trudvang magic that I don't really see in other games. I'm sure it's out there, but I'm sure it'll be in the comments that it's out there. But um, it's a really cool part of Trudvang that I just love, and you can add it into other games. But um, I really enjoy the way that Trudvang does it and talks about it. Also, kind of the counterpart to that with Dimwalkers is that you may offend your god, and so or gods, that they may get upset the way you're using their magic, and so they may uh, make it lash out at you. So it's kind of the same effect, but if I remember right, it might be slightly different. But I'll have to read over that some more before I do the full magic video. But this is just kind of an overview. You can also use the negations. I've heard of people using them to a positive effect, to where you want a certain effect, and you have a spell that does something kind of the opposite. And so instead, you start casting it over and over to try to get the opposite thing to happen that you want. So an example might be if there was uh, like I know if you're trying to raise some undead, like raise something from the dead, it may pull life from other things. You may um, yeah, there's just different ways you can do it. I remember one of someone wanting they had a spell that they could teleport something from where they were to somewhere else, but they couldn't teleport. There was a person somewhere. They couldn't. They didn't have a way to teleport them to where they were, and so instead they just started teleporting objects to that person over and over again until eventually one of the negations kind of went off and sucked that person back to where the object came from. And so they were able to use the spell and use the negation to make that happen, where they got a negative effect, an opposite of what they were casting, but it was what they wanted. So that's a really cool aspect of Trudvang as well, that you can kind of manipulate the magic, and you can just. This is definitely a game where you don't want to set yourself up as an antagonistic DM or GM, but you want to make sure your players know that if they have a cool idea like that, you want to work with them. And so if you don't know about their plan, you may not be able to make it work as a game master. So it's a really cool idea. I would totally work with them and make it happen. So that's a cool way to do it.
So you've had your combat, you've gotten your loot. Now you need to make camp. So you're probably still out in the woods, and whenever they make camp, there's a skill for that where they'll roll under it, try to make a camp, and then that way they can actually recover hit points and stuff. There's also a skill for healing, so people can get their wounds bandaged up. Also, after combat, they're very quickly going to start to regain or recover from their fear points they accumulated during the fight. And so those go down very quickly at first, like 1 minute after seeing the creature, so probably the end of the fight, they would immediately regain or lose some of those fear points. and then after I think it's an hour, and then 6 hours, and then every 24 hours after that. So they start to lose those fear points. But then after that point, it's just once a day they recover from the fear. If they get over 50 fear, then they go mad. And there's a whole section on going mad. It's not good. Just know that you don't ever want to go mad. That's what you need to know. So don't do it. And then that goes into while you're camping, you do want to have kind of random events and things happen while they're traveling. I would not just hit them with encounters all the time. If you're used to like Dungeons and Dragons or Pathfinder or something like that, then their numbers get thrown around about how many encounters to have a day, um, and how many combats they should have in one adventuring day, things like that. Um, in Trudvang, at some point, your players may feel like the number of encounters they want per day is 0 because it's going to be scary. So, uh, even if they have one fight in a day, it may take them a week to recover from that fight. So, have random events that you think of that you want to throw at them and have things that happen, but don't make them all combat oriented. Don't make most of them combat oriented. I don't think that's not how I would do it. The Game Master Guide doesn't give a whole lot of information on this, but I want something to happen every day. You know, I may occasionally, if they're going on a week long journey, there may be maybe 1 or 2 days where it's just pretty uneventful. That's fine. But I want something to be happening on the journey to make it memorable. I don't want it to just be, all right, yeah, we traveled, checked off rations, checked off, we hunted today, we did, and we got the rations, and then we made camp, and then all right, tomorrow we're gonna do the same thing, and you don't want to just be ticking off boxes for your rations and rolling dice to gain more rations, and just that's gonna get really boring really fast. So you don't want to just do that. You want to also have them encounter all kinds of things, like different creatures in the woods that don't mean them harm. They just don't know what they are, and uh, maybe intelligent creatures. Like there's different. Uh, I think it's a hopia or a harpy or something. I think it's like a harpy, but it's they call it a hopia. I can't remember what it's called, but it's basically a harpy. And whenever I ran the game, they were hilarious because they just talked like what you'd expect a bird person to talk like, and it was a lot of I had a lot of fun role playing it, and they kind of kept treasures and try to scare people away from their treasure and stuff. But they also had things they wanted done for them that they might be willing to negotiate and trade for. So that was a lot of fun, and there's all kinds of creatures that just want to mess with them and just maybe be seen for a moment and vanish and just give the impression that the woods are dangerous without constantly hitting them with combats. Um, Also, your player should know that running from an encounter is a perfectly valid strategy in this game because they're probably going to get hit by stuff that is just too strong. I had my players get attacked by a giant spider early on in one game, and it nearly wiped them out. And they hadn't fought anything yet. That was just the first random encounter I had them hit in the woods. They got really unlucky on what I rolled for random encounters. They were used to Dungeons and Dragons, where a giant spider is kind of an expected challenge early on, and they could not handle it in this. So that was kind of a learning experience for them. But then, after making camp and seeing weird things in the woods and stuff like that, they're going to get their adventure points for the night. They'll maybe you have time they can buy a skill now. Maybe they'd want to do it at the start of the next session. But either way, you give them their adventure points and you plan to do it next time. So that's how I run Trudvang. And I can make there's obviously a lot to cover there. I can't cover everything I do in a session in I don't know how long this video is, probably too long. But can't cover everything, but I can make more videos. I'm gonna make at least two more. One on melee combat, melee and range combat, and one on the magic system and how it works. Those might end up being longer than I want them to be, but it's a fairly detailed system. I like the Trudvang system. I like the level of detail you can go into when you make your characters. I feel like every time I help a player make a character in Trudvang, that character has never been made before. That no one has ever played this character before. The way that there's so many skills you can spec into and customize your character to be exactly what you want it to be and do exactly what you want it to do, that I feel like that character has just never been made before. We're making a brand new character. Whereas in other RPGs that I play, I feel like my first to third level, whatever, in 5e has been made 100 times. That's just how I usually feel. Whereas in this game, even a low level character, I feel like is pretty unique. That this may be a brand new character that no one's ever made before. And that's a cool feeling. Also, the combat system is detailed but flexible, gives you a lot of options in combat. I like that, and uh, it's just fun. Another thing you need to keep in mind as a game master in this is that the game master guide doesn't give you any magic items. So be prepared to make magic items if you want that in your game. Trudvang doesn't need a lot of them to be fun. Doesn't need a whole lot of magic items, but be prepared to make them. Some of the published adventures do have magic items in them, and you can just rip some of those out and use those. But you can just go into the magic guide and basically just pluck. I made uh, basically one-time use magic items or ones that would slowly break to where it would have like 3 charges and then it would be done. I'd make stuff like that. So that way I'm giving them magic, and it's up to them when they want to use it, but they don't get to use it very much. And so, if it was, I didn't have to worry about it breaking the game because it only had 3 charges. So once they use those 3 charges, it's gone. And if I don't want them to have it again, I just don't give them another one, and I would know not to introduce that back into the game. Um, and having it into the game for a little while isn't a big deal because it's not permanent. So that's how I would make most of my magic items in the game. And was anything else makes this one unique? The things I'd focus on as a game master for Trudvang is the time it takes in your adventures, the fear when they see new monsters, the time it takes to heal, keep that in mind, and the resource management. When we were playing it, we'd played through, I think it was our second session, and I actually got bored of the resource management, of them ticking off their boxes and doing their hunting and stuff. And I told them, I said, hey, you guys have shown me you can manage your resources. We just aren't going to manage them anymore for this adventure. And they said, no, we want to keep doing it. Like, we don't want to stop. This is fun. And so, some parts of Trudvang may be fun for the players, and they're not actually. I didn't have anything to do when they're managing resources. They're taking off the boxes and making choices and stuff on how they're going to spend their food. And I wasn't doing anything during that time. So, it didn't seem fun to me, but they enjoyed the challenge of managing that resource. So just keep that in mind. Some of these things are fun for the players, even if they don't actually involve you as the game master that much. So keep that in mind that some of these things will be really fun for them. And just communicate with your players, see what they like, and tweak it how you guys want it. So it's a cool system. It is very, to me, it's very hackable. I think there's a lot of stuff I would change about the system now, since I played other systems, but I probably will change some more in it. But I can make some videos on that if you guys want to see it. But
If you like this video, please check out my Patreon. I'm going to post all of my different files and stuff that I create for this game on my Patreon. Some of it I'll put up there for free. I think I already have the character sheet up there for free that I made. It's a form fillable one. It's a Excel spreadsheet that you can use that kind of auto it does all the math for you. So feel free to just grab that off the Patreon, and then uh, I'll sporadically make content. So if you subscribe to my Patreon, that'll encourage me to make more videos like this. But Right now, I plan on making 3 videos, and then really there's a ton of content that could be made for this game because no one else is doing it. So there's really kind of an open market. So I can make whatever videos I want out of it. So, but I'd like to know what you would want to see. So let me know what kind of video you want about Trudvang, and I'll try to make it. So just let me know. Thanks. See ya.